and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. Long, long ago, when dinosaurs ruled the sky, the earth and the seas, there was something very special in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. A very special cinema which was unique in the entire nation. It was called the Hoyts Horror House, and for one brief, shining Camelot-like moment in 1973, it showed only horror movies. It used to be known as the Star Bondi Junction, and it was just up the hill from the famous Bondi Beach. And because cinemas were kind of dying at the time, and television had taken over, video wasn't quite here yet, but television had pretty much taken over. Hoyts had a whole bunch of real estate. They had a whole bunch of cinemas, and they decided to make one of them a horror movie cinema specifically. They decorated the lobby and the upstairs gallery with dummies dressed up like monsters. They had a really nice vibe. I went there a couple of times when I was very young, and from where I lived, it was 50 kilometres by public transport. I had to take a train and then a couple of buses to get there from where I lived in the southwestern suburbs of Sydney. And I did, and I loved it. But it died out. It wasn't successful. It didn't make money. And like many of the things we loved, it was no longer a thing. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was on a couple of old Facebook groups about old cinema advertising, and I found an ad for Hoyts Horror House. And I thought it might be fun to actually watch the two movies that were in a double feature at that cinema and talk about them and see whether I could recapture some of the vibe of those bygone times when people who owned cinemas were trying new things and trying to find a way to let cinemas survive. Now, cinemas have evolved and changed, and some will say devolved since that time. We've now got multiplexes. Single screen cinemas are quite rare, but we can't change that. Nonetheless, I wanted to do a little bit of nostalgia about an old cinema, and this seemed a good place to start. And I'll show you the ad that I found. Here it is up on the screen. The two movies are the movies I'm going to review today. I also have another one of these cinema ads that I've found on the Facebook group. And next week, I'm going to review the second pair of movies, which are Amicus films. These ones that you see on the screen now, Baron Blood and the Deathmaster, also known as Deathmaster, were released in America, at least, by American International Pictures. The review for Baron Blood I'm going to do is from the European release, which has a lot more gore in it, and it doesn't have the score by Les Baxter, which the AIP put in for the American release. It has a score by a guy called Stevie Cipriani, which is the original score. And so, having done that very long intro, let's get into reviewing Baron Blood and the Deathmaster, a double feature from a now forgotten and now no longer existing cinema. As you can see, the promotional ad for Baron Blood says, "Positively the most horrifying film ever made." It was made a year before The Exorcist, so cut him a little bit of slack there. But if we're going to talk about the most horrifying film ever made, I'm going to go with Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge. But that's just me. So Baron Blood was directed by the master, Mario Bava, late in his career when he had a little trouble getting gigs. And Alfredo Leone was the producer of this film. Mario Bava came on board. He wanted to make it in Italy, but Leone showed him some locations they had in mind for doing this in and around Vienna. And Mario Bava agreed to do the film. It's got quite a good cast as well, or at least two people who are a good cast. The first one is Joseph Cotton playing the Baron, though that's held a little bit of a secret. It's a Scooby-Doo reveal at the end of the movie. Originally they wanted to get Vincent Price, and then they wanted to get Ray Milland, both of whom would have been great choices, and both of whom were superb actors, as indeed was Joseph Cotton. But they ended up getting Joseph Cotton, and for the female lead, a woman called Ava, who is a restorer of old buildings and a student at the same time, they got Elke Sommer, who is marvellous in everything. Love Elke Sommer, won't have anything bad said about her, even though she does overact to hell in this movie. The male lead character's name is Peter, and he's played by a guy called Antonio Cantafora, who is quite pretty and is kind of useful in the role, but really doesn't have the ability to react to things as well as the other actors do, which makes it even more interesting. So the story of the movie is this. Peter's inherited a castle, which with the help of a business manager and Ava, he's going to renovate into a hotel. He's lived in America, and he's fascinated with his ancestor from the 1500s. Baron Blood is the name that his ancestor was known by, even though his real name is Baron Otto von Kleist, played by Joseph Cotten. So Peter goes to Vienna for the first time from America, even though he doesn't look at all American. And we get this beautiful title montage, which was the first piece of cinema film shot on a 747. So we see a Pan Am 747 going off the runway. We see the interior of the plane, and it's pretty damn good compared to modern planes. Tons of room, tons of beautiful people on the plane, and a beautiful space age pop score by Stevio Cipriani playing over the titles, which is so 1970s Europop. You gotta love it. So the castle is known as the Castle of the Devils, which they may need to change the name of if they were going to make it into a hotel, but that's never discussed. And so Peter, along with Ava, and also the guy who is supervising the restoration of the building, a person called Dr. Karl Hummel, played by Massimo Girotti. Then they go to the castle, and the castle is scary. It's a bit run down. The basement is full of torture instruments, which have been left there since the 15th century for some reason. But then logic isn't great in this kind of a horror film. And Peter finds a parchment with an incantation from one of the Baron's victims, a woman called Elizabeth, who's a witch. And the incantation is to resurrect the Baron from his grave so that he can suffer from the injuries he died of in perpetuity. Peter, being thick as a brick, decides that he is going to speak the incantation and resurrect the Baron because he's fascinated and wants to talk to his sadistic ancestor from the 15th century. The guy is an idiot. So he intones the incantation, and the wind comes up and blows the parchment into a fireplace so that he can't recant it. Of course, the Baron does rise from his grave, and his face is messed up. It looks like a plate of deli meats after people have had a smorgasbord. He actually goes to a doctor and kills the doctor for some reason, but he goes to the doctor to be treated for it. And he also uncovers the treasure in the basement of the castle, which he then uses for his own purposes. The Baron comes back under another identity and buys the castle from Peter and decides he's going to restore it to the way it originally was. That person is played by Joseph Cotten. Lots of people get killed, there's torture, there's death, there's monstrous things happening, there's a bit of gore. There's a really nice piece where Fritz, the caretaker of the building while it was all decrepit, and who is an alcoholic idiot, gets thrown into an Iron Maiden by the Baron, and that's a really nice gory bit of goo with some very nice practical effects in it. It isn't 21st century type gore, it's very much 1970s Kensington gore, blood kind of gore, but it's very well done. And so things play out as they should for the most part, and at the core and the bones of this plot and the characters, a very ordinary kind of horror movie of the 1970s, but the secret sauce is Mario Bava directing it, and that's the bit that makes this above ordinary. Mario Bava's beautiful camera work. He did have a cinematographer, but the cinematographer only did the second unit stuff when cars are driving around and things like that, and Bava himself took over the cinematography for most of the film, and you get tons and tons of wonderful Mario Bava direction and cinematography. You get some really weird camera angles. You get incredible light placement, both in the foreground and in the background. You get that use of primary colors to enhance things. You get a couple of very, very effective sequences, one of which is when the Baron garrots somebody and hangs them from a staircase, which is shot from angles you would not consider to shoot it from. And it's done incredibly well. And there's another scene in the township where Ava is being chased by the Baron, and it's a foggy night. And you've got that opportunity for Mario Bava to light a town in the fog in an incredibly evocative way, where Ava is running around and will stop around a corner and catch her breath, and she hits the key light perfectly, and you don't see any hint of the key light before Elke Summer reaches it. It's a masterclass in beautiful, evocative direction and cinematography. It is lush and beautiful, and I love the way that Bava did it. It's not peak Mario Bava. There are so many other movies of his which are better films, but this is Bava using his skill set to enhance and improve a kind of ordinary little horror movie from late in his career. I like this film for that. Just watching it for the way it looks is truly marvelous, and seeing that, yeah, there's probably about 5 lights in the scene, and each one of them is there for a specific purpose and with intent, and it really worked for me. I just love this film, not because of the horror film, not because of the fairly obvious villain, not even for Elke Summer and Joseph Cotton. I like it because of the way it was made and the masterful skill that the filmmaker put into a movie, which at the heart of things really didn't deserve his skill set. If you're going to watch it, please try not to watch the American one. It's got less gore. It's got a replaced musical soundtrack by Les Baxter, which is inferior to the Stevie Cipriani one, and it's cut down for the delicate sensibilities of America in the 1970s. Try to get the European one. I believe there has been a Blu-ray release of it, though I had a little trouble tracking that down. But you really should try to get the best possible quality of this one. I'm fairly sure that the version of it that was shown at the Hoyts Horror House back in the day would have been the American one, because there was a lot of American International Pictures product dumped onto the Australian market at the time. Tons and tons of films, things like Boxcar Bertha and Slaughter with Jim Brown and things like that. Lots of those things came out in packages and were distributed through local companies here in Australia. That then takes us to another film, a weird one, Deathmaster, also known as The Deathmaster, though on the title cards in the movie it says Deathmaster, so I'm going with that as a title. The original title that the movie makers wanted to call the movie before American International bought the picture as a tax write-off. The original title was Guru Vampire, which shows you the kind of movie it actually is. It stars Robert Quarry, who was Count Yorga vampire in Return of Count Yorga. This movie was made in between the two. He was the guy that AIP was grooming to replace Vincent Price as their master of horror. He actually appeared in a couple of movies with Vincent Price, and Vincent Price and him didn't get on at all. Robert Quarry was singing in his dressing room, and Vincent Price heard him and came in. And Robert Quarry said to him, "You didn't know I could sing, did you?" And Vincent Price said, "Well, I knew you couldn't act." So they didn't get on at all. And this one shows Robert Quarry overacting, because he's playing a hippie vampire in a sense, and that almost requires overacting.
Hey, that's a weird scene. How'd you do that?
Hey, what's your name, man?
Corda.
The movie was actually directed by an actor, or an ex-actor, a guy called Ray Danton, who was in the rise and fall of Legs Diamond back in the early 60s before he transitioned to being a director. He did a number of episodes of TV series, had a fairly okay career. Now, the movie has an interesting start to it. We see a guy called Barbado, a black magician almost, who walks along a beach and then climbs up to the cliffs above the beach and starts a voodoo ritual. And from the ocean, a coffin floats ashore. This is on one of the beaches in Santa Monica. A surfer comes along and finds the coffin and opens it and goes, "Ah!" And then Barbado comes along and chokes the guy out before dragging the coffin away. It's an interesting start to a movie. It doesn't live up to the potential, but it is what it is as far as a low-budget AIP 1970s product that became a tax write-off. We then cut to a bunch of hippies in Topanga Canyon. There's a little bit of a market there. There's a shop run by an older guy called Pop, played by John Fiedler. Now, John Fiedler, character actor, was also the voice of Winnie the Pooh in the Disney Winnie the Pooh movies back in the day. So basically, Winnie the Pooh is in a vampire movie. Now, the hero of the piece is a guy called Pico, played by Bill Ewing, who has a fight with a biker and knows Kung Fu. Now, this is kind of interesting because when it comes to the crunch at the end of the film, he totally forgets that he knows Kung Fu. But he does. He's got a beautiful girlfriend called Rona. And Pico has an interesting look too. It looks like he's modeled his look on Jeff Chandler in an old western where he plays Cochise. He's got the headband, he's got the kind of long hair kind of thing. Pico and his girlfriend are hippies. They're hanging out with their friends. They're living in an abandoned mansion in Topanga Canyon back when that was possible. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting location shooting where you see a kind of a real life hippie market in Topanga Canyon area in the early 1970s. So there's almost a documentary feel to those parts of the film. So the hippies are at their mansion and they meet a guy called Corder, played by Robert Quarry, who turns out to be the vampire who was in the box that washed up out of the sea. And Corder, being the charismatic thousands of year old vampire that he is, takes over the hippie commune by sheer hypnotic magnetism.
Life is important. Its extension is nothing less than an approach to immortality.
And there's some weird philosophical dialogue that he sprouts at the hippies to ensorcel them. And most of that was improvised by Robert Quarry. And it's weird. It's deeply weird. And he's playing over the top and very camp. Pico, and to a lesser extent his girlfriend Rhoda, aren't buying it. So they go to Pop and try to find some help. The biker that Pico had a fight with, his name is Monk, is not believing the bullshit, though his girlfriend gets involved in the cult. Between them all, they try to beat the vampires. The interesting thing is, you got John Fiedler, who is not the first actor you'd think when it comes to being a vampire hunter. But as things progress, Pico gets Pop involved in going to the mansion and trying to defeat the vampires, even though neither of them know what they're doing. Meanwhile, you've got Robert Quarry spouting philosophical dialogue while hippie girls dance around. No nudity in this film, which is kind of a disappointment. I think it would have been enhanced by some judicious but gratuitous nudity. Don't get that, which is disappointing, and probably was disappointing to me if I hadn't seen it in the 1970s when I was going to the cinema. You know Chekhov's gun, where if a gun appears on a mantelpiece in a play, at some stage it's going to be used later in the play. You know, Chekhov's gun. In this case, we've got Chekhov's bowl of leeches, because where the coffin for Corder is, there's a big glass bowl full of water and leeches, which Pico accidentally puts his hand into. That's Chekhov's leeches, because Chekhov's leeches get used later on to defeat Corder in a kind of interesting way. And those moments of mad stuff are the saving grace of this movie. Yeah, Robert Quarry couldn't act. He could overact. He could be flamboyant and theatrical, but his vampire is no more believable than it was when he played Count Yorga or when he played anything else. He was an actor of one level. We get some really weird stuff, like there are cabins underneath the mansion for some reason, which is where the vampire hides his coffin. And the parts of the chase between Barbado, the big servant, and the vampire, and Pico and his girlfriend Rhoda happen. It's a weird movie, and it plays a little bit like the first Count Yorga movie, in that there are beautiful female vampires wearing gowns, a trope they borrowed from Hammer, but it's lower tier B level, even for its time. And it ends on a really odd note. Now, I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, because some of you are going to watch it. Most of you aren't. Some of you have seen it. Some of you are going to watch it. Most of you aren't. But I'm not going to spoil the ending, because it kind of leaves you with a kind of reaction to it. It's shot well, and there's some weird bits, particularly when Corder is biting his first female victim, who is the girlfriend of Monk, the biker guy. And it's shot really oddly and cut really oddly. And you kind of go, what? While you're watching it. So that's Deathmaster. I kind of like it, but I'm also kind of ambivalent about it as well. So there are two movies, Baron Blood and The Deathmaster. So what is my summary of watching these movies in modern era? What was it, 50 years after they came out? 50 years after they showed at Hoyts Horror House in Bondi Junction. I got a little bit of a frisson of nostalgia about watching them again, and I liked that. I got into the headspace of trying to see them as I would have seen them at the time. That worked for me to a certain extent, but there's been a lot of time passed since then, and I watched a lot of movies since then. So I had to kind of peek through the lens of my 1973 self to enjoy the movies. But Mario Bava's cinematography was the saving grace of the first one, and moments of weirdness were the saving grace of the second one. Revisiting these kind of old movies, particularly this time of year when it's Halloween, when the days are getting warmer, when the sun's coming out for longer, and the breeze has a little bit of warmth to it, which is not the experience people have in Halloween in other parts of the world, but it's the way we experience Halloween here in Australia. I liked it. I enjoyed watching those movies with that connection to a place and a time I'd been. Would I watch them again? Possibly I would watch Baron Blood again, but I don't think I need to watch Deathmaster again. I think it's shot its load, and that's all I need of that. And particularly Robert Quarry is an actor who you can only spend a certain amount of time with before you get bored. So having said that, it was an interesting experiment. I am going to watch the second double feature next week, and I'll talk to you about that then. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. You can contribute to the channel by becoming a channel member. You can also contribute to the channel by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got a haul I got from Imprint, which has the things for Halloween in it, and there are some interesting horror films and one or two that I haven't seen before on Blu-ray, but I'm really going to enjoy rewatching, so stick around for that. And in the meantime, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Grab an old double feature from an old newspaper and just go with that and see how you go. And I'll catch you next time.